distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Now we are going to start a very important session of this 7th Sun Annual Economist Conference 2024. The session, as you know, it is titled as Political Economy of Development and Institutions. We are kind of embarking on a journey through the intricate intersections of politics, economics, and institutional dynamics, particularly within the context of Global South. So as we gather here today, we are, as this academic community and policy makers, so we all confronted with a very diverse area of policy strategies and theories and evolving kind of new ideas on board. And you can have sort of a reflection on this diverse area of perspectives and empirical analysis that shed light on the complexities of development and governance in emerging economies like country like Bangladesh, or you may also find some other countries in the region and also beyond the region. At the very beginning, I am not going to take long, so let me start with the paper presentation. And we are very happy that all the presenters, team presenters, are here with us, and one of our colleagues will join us over online. So let me start with the ones like who already are here in person. So first, I would like to invite Shubhodra. Shusri Shubhodra, Sundar Nam, Shusri Shubhodra. She will talk about political competition, public sector corruption, and economic outcomes in India. Shubhodra, it's over to you. Is that all right? It is Shuri, or she can use this one, right? Okay. Shubhodra is working as Assistant Professor of Economics, Indian Institute of Technology, Bhubaneswar, India. Should you feel comfortable standing here, or you can sit here as well? Please go over. Please feel comfortable. Please. Just make yourself comfortable.
Okay. Yes. Pressing this key. Okay. We'll change everything. Okay.
Good afternoon. Is I audible? Good afternoon, everyone. The paper Political Competition, Public Sector Corruption, and Economic Outcomes in India. It is joint work with my supervisor, Dr. Sitakant Panda from IIT Bhubaneswar. In this paper, we try to analyze the impact of corruption on economic growth and Human Development Index in 16 major Indian states during 1993 to 2020. In this study, we also try to analyze how the role of political competition moderate the role of corruption on economic growth and Human Development Index. The literature that have evolved in the last couple of decades analyzed political institutions and quality of governance has a significant impact, explaining long-run economic growth and regional differences, why some countries are poor and why some countries are rich. Political competition is a major indicator of good quality of institutions, and corruption, which is defined as the misuse of public office for private gain, is a major political and social economic problem affecting developed and developing countries alike. And there is several literature observed that when the corruption cases is low, it observes higher economic growth and development. So low corruption level is a silent marker of a good political institution. There are broadly two schools of thought on the impact of corruption on economic growth and Human Development Index. One school of thought says that corruption greases the wheels of economic growth. It means corruption promotes growth. In the presence of corruption, that is observed that there is an increase in the economic growth, and the bureaucratic speed and efficiency also increase. Another school of thought says that corruption sands the wheels of economic growth. It means corruption distorts the resource allocation process, increase the inefficiency and inequality. But our result supports the wheel-greasing hypothesis. We get the convincing result that incidence of higher corruption cases is associated with higher economic growth and human development index. But the interaction of results of various interaction models between political competition and corruption supports the says that when corruption increases, the economic growth slows down. So in the various literature in Indian context developed, analyze the political and institutional variables on economic growth and development. But the literature is very thin and sparse when it comes to the relationship between corruption and economic growth. And if we observe the literature in the analyzing the presence of political competition on economic growth and human development index, establishing the relationship between corruption is very like no existence of this kind of literature. So in the empirical analysis part, we have used 4 alternative methodology. One is fixed effect regression and then is the feasible generalized square method. Then the fixed effect regression with disqualified standard error and the fixed effect regression with panel corrected standard error. Our for robustness check, we used these 4 kind of econometric methodology. And we have used 3 alternative measure of corruption cases. First is number of cases investigated, then the number of cases charge sheeted means when the police investigated some cases, then firstly the police filed a charge sheet. Then the number of cases convicted means after the trial, some of the cases are convicted. And also we have used 3 alternative measure of political competition. First is effective number of parties measured in terms of vote share and seat share, and also the probability ratio index. Our result in different combinations hold the same result, that corruption increases economic growth and human development index. So the outcome variables per capita GSDP is collected from the Handbook of Statistics on the Indian States from RBI website. We obtain the state level human development data from the Global Data Lab published by Radboud University. The main variable of interest, cases investigated, cases charge sheeted, and cases convicted, collected from the Crime in India report published by NCRB website. This corruption cases is actually collected from the Vigilance Department under the IPC Act, under the Corruption Act. We use several control variables in our study, like coalition government dummy. If the ruling party does not having the seat share of 50%, and then it's a coalition dummy equal to 1, otherwise 0. Center alignment dummy means when the state ruling party and the center ruling party is same, each equal to 1. And then the CM party regional dummy, it means the state ruling party is a regional party, and voter turnout, judicial efficiency. We have also control for economic variables like gross fish capital formation, poverty rate, mean years of schooling, long urban population. These are all collected from the Reserve Bank of India's Handbook of Statistics. This is the result for simple fixed effect model for log per capita GSDP using ENP seat share as a measure of political competition. Here we can see that the log cases investigated is positively associated with log per capita GSDP. So when the corruption increases, log per capita GSDP also increases. The result is same when we control the ENP vote share, then when we control for the PRI. For log HDI, when we control ENP seat share, Law cases investigated, law cases charge-sheeted, and law cases convicted is a positive and significant if impact on log SDI. Also, in controlling ANP vote share and PRI, the result holds the same. The panel fixed effect regression with dispergate standard error for log per capita GSTP is also hold the same result. It has a positive and significant impact on per GSTP. When we analyze the relationship between log cases investigated, charge-sheeted, and convicted with log SDI, we also get the result that it is positive and significant. We just keep FGLS, which also give the same result. The interactions model, like I say, the another objective of our study that how political competition impact corruption and how political competition moderating corruption's role on impacting economic growth and log SDI. It also, the result shows that when the state is more politically competitive, the effect of corruption on economic growth is negative. Like when the corruption is increases, the economic growth is decreases, and the human development is also decreases. So as I already say our conclusion that corruption greases the wheels of economic growth, and in the presence of political competition, corruption reduces the economic growth and human development index. So the policy implication is that while corruption is growth enhancing, government policies must be designed in such a way that the bureaucratic and executive efficiency will be increased, and public programs must have an incentive structure for the citizen to be honest in their activities. But one of the major way to reduce corruption, as we witnessed from our studies, that if the political competition is increased at the subnational level, then maybe the economic growth is also increased and log human development index is also increased, but the corruption is low. So this is I conclude here.
Thank you. Thank you, Shubhodra. Thank you very much for your paper. She is doing PhD, right?
Yes,
have you
no,
done with your thesis?
No, sir, I am second year of my PhD.
Okay, great. So it's a wonderful work, and as you see that she shed lights on the very relationship between corruption and economic outcome, economic growth, and also they tried to make a kind of a connection in relation to political competition in the context of India. Well, I leave it to my designated discussions for elaborating and commenting on her paper later. But before that, let me invite our next presenter. Shubhodra, you can go back to your seat. Then there will be a session for you to respond to questions from the audience. So the next presenter, Mr. Sirajuddin Isar, he will join us over online from Netherlands, right?
Yes, sir.
So Dr. Sirajuddin Isar will talk about failure of liberal institutions building, a political economy analysis of tax administration in Afghanistan. Mr. Sirajuddin, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. We can hear you clear, very clear and loud. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Shall I start or?
Just a second. Yes, now it's over to you. Please.
Can you also see my screen? Because I just shared it to see.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and perhaps good evening to some colleagues maybe. So as you kindly stated, so this is this paper is basically one of the PhD chapters that I completed on the political economy of taxation and state building in Afghanistan, and the core argument of the paper is that it challenges the kind of liberal institution building, including building the fiscal administration, or what we call the tax administration in Afghanistan. So I just begin with my, so what I'm going to be talking today, so because of the time constraint, I'll try to be as short and as quick as I can. Maybe some slides I'll skip. So yeah, I'll begin with the research questions, then I will present my analytical framework, and then my research findings. So my research questions basically is focus on three questions. First one is how taxation have kind of been subject to changes and evolution, and that is like my how questions. My second question is like, what is explaining this kind of changes and shifts in taxation policies and practices? I also use the word practices because there is a bit of difference between taxation policy as opposed to the practices. And then that is the why questions. And then what are the theoretical and the policy implications of these findings? And it's kind of the so what questions. So just to begin with the analytical framework, I don't want to go into these, all of them so much with details because, again, because of the time constraints. I borrow the classic endogenous model, and that is, I use it for the historical analysis, but so it's just about the Tilly's argument about how war makes state, state makes war, and then the protection and extraction. On the extraction, so that is very much to do how the taxation system kind of been shaped up in the context of the Western European countries. And then I argue this does not work in a developing country. But then I move on to the liberal institutionalist model, what we call in the exogenous model, the democracy, the election, the rule of law, governance structure. So in a nutshell, building institution on the basis of the liberal view of state building, liberal view of tax building or tax administration building, and so on and so forth. So, but my argument is that the liberal model does not work, as I said. And so what I do, basically, I use a political economy model, which basically challenges the good governance or the liberal institutional model. And why I argue why I believe so is because the liberal view is more of a universalized template, so it cannot work in any context given the differences, given the situation. And then it is so much to do with the donor's prescription. So I used to work with the central bank when we were working during the early years of the international intervention, and I was practically seeing things that they were not working. So I was closely working with the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. So it was so much to do with their own prescriptions, and it did not work. And then what is more important, and that I also argue in this paper, is the liberal view does not talk about the complexity of power relation at a very local level that kind of shapes up your own taxation policy. So that's why it's a political economy model. My friends from economic background may find it a little bit out of the context, but I try to make it more relevant. So within the political economy, I use two models, one from Mushtaq Khan himself from Bangladesh, your own country, and he teaches at SAEC, School of Oriental and African Studies in the UK, and he also is an economist. But his model is more to do with the political, he calls it political settlement. So by political settlement, simply, he means that here political settlement settles. So settles the differences and settles the violence, settles the problems, settles those sort of stuff. But it basically political settlement is to do with the distribution and the organization of power, and also resources between the state and mainly about elites. We call them elites or non-state actors, and of course the state. So those of you know that rent or and revenue, economists call it and revenue. So rents and revenue is the core of the political settlement. So rent sharing is there. People in the settlement will have to be enjoying some receipt of rent so that they avoid getting into violence. And political settlement is not peace agreement. There is a bit of confusion. It is not conflict resolution, but it is it's very much to solve the problem of violence through rent sharing. And so it is very much evolving, and that's why there are different types of them. In the context of Afghanistan, it was very much of a fragile limited access order, a fragile political settlement. So the second model, which is very similar to Mushtaq Khan's, is also from another good economist, Douglas North, and he calls it limited access order. So by limiting access order means that rents are basically created so that access to valuable resources are limited, and that's why elites who are the key stakeholders in a country, then they have to be receiving rent so that they avoid violence. So these are basically complementary models one to each other. And now I move on to the research findings. So my key research finding, both in the past from the literature review as well as from my primary research that I did in Afghanistan. So three key factors, three intertwined factors is kind of explaining the shifts and changes in taxation policies. And they are basically the changing nature of political settlement, which I just explained, the shifting taxation policies and practices, and more importantly, the role of international actors, the role of aid. Afghanistan has been a rentier state for the past, I would say, for the past 2 centuries as an aid-dependent country, because there is an argument that it was an aid-dependent country for the past 2 centuries, but can you call it also a rentier state for the past 2 centuries? It's a little bit paradoxical. So with regards to findings, so early days in Afghanistan, and particularly from 2001 and 2009, I call this era as era of institutionalization, when there were efforts towards building states, towards building the institutions of the state, the government, so rule of law. So we had some improvement, and you can see in the picture that the women were taking active part in the parliament. So we had the parliament, legislation, institution, more importantly, automation. So freedom of media, freedom of expressions, and I think it was one of the, I wouldn't be wrong if I argue that it was one of the very unprecedented level of freedom that we have seen in the context of Afghanistan. Regionally, we were not comparable. Of course, unfortunately, things are not like that anymore at the moment. But all of this was also dependent on billions of aid money that was flowing into Afghanistan. So if I go to my next slide, what is this? Okay. So at the financial institution level, there were also progress. I was working with a currency conversion project, and as you can see in the picture, like people used bags of money. And so that was one of the big steps that we did. So we dropped three zeros, and we introduced new currency. At the fiscal level, and particularly at the legislation part of the fiscal level, we created the income tax law, which was revised in 2004 and 2009. On the organizational level, we created the large taxpayer office, medium taxpayers office, and small taxpayer office that they did not exist before. And we live in the age of information technology, and that's why we also appreciated the fact that we needed to get automated. And two key platforms that we introduced was the SECTUS, Standard Integrated Government Tax Administration System, and that was very much to do with the revenue collection. And then for the custom duties, then we had this ASICODA that was introduced in 2007. So central revenue became kind of centralized. So the kind of policies the kind of
Wait, Dr. Ishrar, your time is up. So could you please conclude for
I
next?
was told that I can speak for 15 minutes, no?
It's 10 minutes. It was 10 minutes. And well, I mean, you can take 1 more minute to conclude, please. So you will have another chance for responding to questions from the audience. So please.
Okay. So just to conclude, this progress contributed to revenue increase. And as you can see, the level of revenue to GDP was 3.2% increase to 8.4%. But things have changed. The relationship with American, Karzai's relation got tense, and then there was a lot of disputes going on between, particularly after 2010, and that's why I call it the deinstitutionalization strategy. And things have changed, and Karzai relied more on elites, and then he co-opted these powerful elites like Ismail Khan. I don't go through these names; it's going to take time, and then. So he was very much reluctant for tax administration building or tax bargaining. So there was no efforts or whatsoever with regards to building our taxation system. And rent sharing became kind of institutionalized. I call it Joe Ramad, which I can talk about later on, but I just quickly move on to the result of that the institutionalization policies. You can see in the table the level of the proportion of revenue to GDP decreased from 10% to 8.2%. And then we had Ghani who came to the government, and it was an externally or unity government or externally imposed political settlement by the mediation of the US. And then he kind of, it was a coalition government. And then, but he was totally the opposite of Karzai, the kind of political settlement, the co-option policy that Karzai pursued. He disrupted it, and he cut off or he limited the kind of redistribution to powerful stakeholders, or what I call them the political elite. So he over-centralized power, he over-centralized taxation. His policy, he introduced new taxes. I don't want to go into it. And also he introduced new custom duties or increased the tariff rates on the current ones. His policy were paid off. And as you can see, the level of revenue to GDP increased 9.9% in 2015 to 13.4%, unprecedented level of the revenue GDP ratio that we never had in Afghanistan. And I think that is Defet who says that if a country is making 15% of GDP, that is not a fragile state. Yeah, but there were continuities. There was a poor taxation, tax evasion, and leviages persisted across both Ghani and across both administration. So they both could not prevent corruption, which was widespread.
I'm sorry, Dr. Ishrar, I have to intervene. That other presenters are waiting. So thank you very much for your presentation. And again, we will invite you for the next round of discussion during the question and answer session. Thank you so much. So thank you. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Please, let me go to the next presenter since we have already eaten up some of the time. Please. It's now over to Samia, Ms. Samia Islam. And she will talk about, does institutional quality matter for financial development, and evidence from 6 Asian emerging economics. Dr. Samia, Ms. Samia Islam, with other co-authors like Mohammad Ubaidullah, Mr. MD Imran Hussain, and Mr. N. Nasser Nabil. All of them are students of Department of Economics, Jahangirnagar University. So I take the privilege to welcome Samia. Samia, it's over to you.
Thank you, sir. So good afternoon, this is Samia Islam, and I'm going to present the paper, Does Institutional Quality Matter for Financial Development? Evidence from 6 Asian Emerging Economies. This paper is authored by Mohammad Ubaidullah, MD Imran Hussain, and Nasser Nabil, all students of economics at Jahangirnagar University, myself included. So what do we really understand by financial development? Any development actually in economics essentially means that reduction in costs, right? So that like the transactions become easier, and so that reduction in cost in the financial sector is can be like easily described as financial development. Now, moving forward to the literature that we have reviewed for this paper, we can see that institutional quality has been like seen as an important variable for economic growth and such. But in terms of financial development, the literature comes lacking. But still, we find some literature regarding stock market development, then bank sector development, and etc. I'm not going to go through the literature in detail since we have a time constraint. But like I'm going to point your attention to the last where we see that conditional impact of institutional quality on financial development does exist. That is, institutional quality, in order to impact financial development, requires to like achieve a certain threshold level that has been set by law at all in 2012. So that is a literature that we will be requiring to like review our to explain our discussions later. And we have some further literature that we reviewed, but those will be discussed in the literature results and discussion chapter as well. So quality, what did we use to like measure it? World Bank or International Bank for Reconstruction and Development that has developed this worldwide governance indicator, which has 6 dimensions of governance. As you can see, voice and accountability, political stability and absence of violence or terrorism, government effectiveness, regulatory quality, rule of law, control of corruption. These 6 dimensions essentially encompass all the necessary elements of institutional quality, and for that reason, we used these indicators for our paper, which is also like used widely in other literatures. So what's the objective of our study? We are trying to evaluate the role of institutional quality in the development financial sector in the emerging Asian economies. And in moving forward to our methodology, if we are to see the description of the variables, our dependent variable is naturally financial development, which is measured by domestic credit to private sector as percentage of GDP. Why is that? Because we know that as financial development occurs, credit becomes easier to obtain for the private sector, and thus it can act as a proxy. And all our variables are taken in logarithmic form in order for its ease of interpretation. And we have taken 2 control variables, which are GDP and trade, because existing literature do show that they have immense impact on financial development. And the other 6 variables are the indicators developed by World Bank, as I've already stated, all in logarithmic form. The expected signs of these variables, the control variables are quite like certain. They're expected to positively impact financial development. But in terms of institutional quality, we have some form of ambiguity, because since we're talking about emerging countries and developing countries, so the effect of these institutional indicators might not be so easy to interpret, as we will see later. So about the data, we've taken data from 2002 to 2016, because since then the World Bank has started publishing the data on a yearly basis. And we have 6 cross-sectional units, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Iran, Malaysia, Philippines. We had to limit it within 6 because of data availability. To keep the data strongly balanced, we had to take only 6 Asian emerging economies, and the data source was, as I've said, World Bank. So this is the panel model that we are to estimate. But as we know, that panel model can take 2 forms: fixed effect and random effect. The fixed effect equation, like includes a differential intercept term, and the random effect model shows the variation in the error term. So which model is more appropriate for our study? We have conducted the Hausman test for that, and the null hypothesis, as usual, we know that it was random effect model prevails. But since the probability value is close to 0, the null hypothesis is rejected, and like our model is like fixed effect model is like more appropriate for our study. We have conducted some diagnostic tests then. As we know that in case of panel data, cross-sectional dependence in residuals can be quite common phenomenon, and it can create great difficulties for our study, because in the presence of cross-sectional dependence, the estimators do not remain unbiased. So we had to conduct this test, and Bruce pattern test suggests that cross-sectional dependency does in our model. So that's the difficulty that we have to get through. And additionally, modified wall tests show that heteroscedasticity exists in the model, and Ulrich tests show that first order oscillation also exists in our model. So for all these difficulties, we resort to visible generalized least squares to generate unbiased estimators. Now I'm going to move forward to the results and discussions part. This is the descriptive statistics of our panel data. I'm not going to go through this data. I'm just going to report the results from our discussion. I have reported the significant variables of the FGLS model here. And as we can see in the constant variables, those are as expected. They are like significant. And among the 6 indicators, political stability, regulatory quality, and rule of law, they appear to be significant, and that too at 1% level. So how well do these results fare? We look into the prevailing evidence and try to make some plausible explanation. Here we have that political stability, an increase in this indicator increases the financial development by 0.09%. So this is actually supported by the literature in the sense that when political stability persists in an economy, that actually gives the investors confidence, and that actually boosts the investment sector and causes financial development. And then we move forward to rule of law, which also appears to be significant, and its impact is apparently larger than political stability, which is consistent with the theoretical expectation that rule of law indeed enhance the scope and ability for financial development. In case of developing emerging economies, it has been seen through literature, significant positive relationship persists between rule of law and financial development. The interesting finding that we got is that regulatory quality, it impacts financial development negatively. Why that might occur is that in case of developing or emerging countries, they are well below, that threshold level where where the enhancement or improvement in regulatory quality might not have the ability to impact financial development substantially. Additionally, within a poor bureaucratic structure, additional regulations can create lag and increase red signal periods, which might be bad news for the financial development condition. And then we see the insignificant variables that we have, those in accountability, government effectiveness, and control of corruption. These are similarly explained by the threshold argument that the voice and accountability and government effectiveness in the developing and emerging country might be so poor that an improvement in them might not contribute to the development of financial sector. And additionally, government effectiveness can be, government policies can be manipulated or influenced by a few dominant groups, which might lead to overall welfare loss of the society. And at the same time, in many developing countries such as South Asia, most of large-scale investments are carried out by influential groups or companies who actually use the corporate systems to allow their businesses to thrive. And as expected, control variables, they are, positively and significantly associated with financial development, and they're supported by the existing literature. So what are our conclusions? The conclusions state that our relevant institutional variables are political stability, absence of violence and terrorism, rule of law, and regulatory quality. But what are the way forward from there? As we can see that improvement in the aforementioned institutions, that is like a policy implication, that is something for the policymakers to think about. But in terms of research, I think comprehensive data analysis and advanced techniques might be employed to study whether these institutional variables are actually significant and the others are less significant. And what is more important is the scrutiny of the mechanism. That if political stability and rule of law positively impact financial development status quo, then what are its mechanisms? What are its particular channels through which these institutions are affecting financial development financial sector? And why are the impacts of regulatory quality negative on financial development? So these are there are scope for further research. The limitation of the study has been that obtaining data has been very difficult, but there are scope to move further from there. So thank you.
Thank you, Samia. Samia and her co-authors, we congratulate all of you for making this brilliant presentation on the very relationship between quality of institutions and financial sector development in emerging economies in Asia. All right, we'll have question for sure for them as well. However, before that, let me invite our next presenter. Next presenter is Mr. MD Ahad Al Ajad Munem. He is a student of economics, University of Dhaka. Munem. As you know, like your time is 10 minutes. It's over to you, Munem.
Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon, everyone. We all have heard about Hitler, the ludicrous Führer of Germany who threw the German people into a horrific period of suffering, which was dissociated by the nation at least half a century after the demise of that notorious dictator. And now you might imagine how Hitler is relevant to this topic I'm discussing. And I accept that will be quite a valid confusion. But let me introduce to this quote by Esther Duflo that I found from one of her lectures available in YouTube from MIT. What Mrs. Duflo says basically is quite what happened to Germany. Hitler came to power through democratic elections, and Germany surely did achieve a fast-growing economy for a short period of time, but the divisive and anti-Semitic politics he unleashed to get and maintain the power made German society a highly polarized one, which ultimately led to the Second World War and the destruction of all economic achievements obtained by the nation. So when we see in current world a surging political polarization in almost everywhere, as sincere citizens from around the world, that should actually make us worry. If not a lot, at least a bit, according to my humble opinion. Migration, cultural disparities, COVID-19 pandemic, refugee crisis are the primary contributing factors of polarization in Europe and North America. However, the trajectory of political polarization in South Asia is quite different. Racial supremacy or economic class are not the major players for political polarization here. Rather, the conflicting interpretations of nationality is the key factor. As for Bangladesh, the personal rivalry of the heads of two major political parties is identified as the primary reason behind the ever-growing political polarization, alongside the conflict of Bengali and Bangladeshi nationalism. Primary objective of my paper is to explore the economic ramifications of political polarization and to suggest policies to deal with the repercussions of political polarization. I have used the data of 20 countries over 33 years, spanning from 1991 to 2023. For political polarization, I have used VDEM dataset, and the data of macroeconomic indicators and control variables are taken from the World Bank data. Fixed effects model and random effects model, as usual, were employed to analyze the panel dataset. Later on, Hausman test and robustness tests were used to ensure the relevance of approach. From previous researches in economics and political science, valuable insights are found on the complex dynamics at play between political influence and economic outcomes. Models employed here are quite straightforward. For both random and fixed effect models, political polarization is used as independent variable and specific macroeconomic indicator as dependent variable. Basically, three different regressions were ran for three macroeconomic indicators, which are GDP growth rate, unemployment rate, per capita GDP. And the per capita GDP here is used the purchasing power parity adjusted one. While controlling for education expenditure, health expenditure, infrastructure, and foreign direct investment inflow. However, the interpretation of alpha I in both the models is quite different. In fixed effect, it represents all time invariant differences among countries that are not captured by the observed variables. For random effect, it is interpreted as the average deviation of each country from the overall mean value of the dependent variable. The summary statistics shows us that the variables used in this paper, in my paper actually, are in an acceptable range of standard deviation. Hence, the panel data set in use is a strongly balanced and representative one. Fixed effect models deemed appropriate for analyzing the association between GDP growth rate and political polarization with a highly significant overall model. However, the significance of political polarization was insufficient to reject the null hypothesis. Precluding definitive conclusions, of course, further robustness analysis supported these findings, revealing somewhat flattened trajectory in the observed trend line. Despite uncertainties, a tentative inference suggests that robust economic growth may coincide with political polarization. As you might see in the screen, this is where I switched the axis. Here, GDP growth rate is in x-axis. So what this suggests is with growing GDP growth rate, political polarization should lower down. And for USA, the trend line is clearly a negatively sloping one. So I have run other trend line analysis as well for developed countries, and for almost all of them, I have found negatively sloping trend line. However, for some developing countries like Bangladesh, the trend line was a positively sloped one. The Hausman test favored the random effect model for analyzing unemployment and political polarization. While the overall model was highly significant, political polarization did not reach conventional significance levels, suggesting insufficient evidence to conclude its influence on unemployment definitively, despite a global trend line indicating a potential association with heightened polarization and increased unemployment. Caution is needed, however, in drawing conclusions due to data limitations and contextual factors. As a matter of fact, for some countries, I have used 33 years of data, but for some countries, there were data missing for 15 years or so. The fixed effect model deemed appropriate for studying the relationship between political polarization and GDP per capita. And as I said before, this GDP per capita is purchasing power parity adjusted, and also I have used the natural log value of it. The model exhibits high overall significance, indicating the robustness of the findings. Political polarization significantly influences GDP per capita, although the coefficient magnitude suggests a modest impact. The observed downward trend line suggests a potential decrease in GDP per capita with increasing political polarization. So the analysis actually suggests continued investigation is essential to fully understand the nuanced dynamics at play. However, we cannot ignore the correlation between macroeconomic indicators and political polarization. Now, comprehensive strategies addressing political polarization must span political, social, and economic realms. Promotion of political accountability, strengthening democratic institutions, and fostering inclusive discourse are vital for governance and social cohesion. Initiatives targeting media polarization and enhancing media literacy are crucial for informed civic engagement. Collaboration among policymakers, scholars, and civil society is essential for evidence-based strategies and bridging ideological divides. And as I said before, further interdisciplinary research and more advanced methodological refinement are necessary to understand the complex dynamics between political polarization and economic outcomes, ultimately, which will foster resilient and inclusive democracies against emerging dynamic of political polarization. And that's what I will very happy to answer your question if there are any. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Munir, for a really brilliant presentation. And with that, the fourth presentation, we have come to the conclusion of our paper presentation part. And And of course, we congratulate all of our paper presenters for their brilliant effort. At this stage, the next part of this proceedings will be divided into two. First, we'll go to our distinguished designated discussion. Then the floor will be open for question answer. So, yes, now we have our discussion. Dr. Asif Mohammed Shahan, please. So, over to you, please.
Thank you. I think everyone can hear me.
Yeah, that microphone is also fine.
Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks to the presenters for this wonderful presentation. So before starting my discussion, I just want to point out two things. First of all, I'm here as a discussant, not necessarily an evaluator. So I'm not necessarily going to talk a little bit about what went right, what went wrong, because I think all of those papers have done an exceptionally, well job to sort of, make a point. The second thing that I want to point out, that I think there's a reason that SANEM invited me, a student of political science, to sort of, have a work as a discussant on a political economy, session. I think the reason is that when we talk about political economy, sometimes to the economists, I know that I'm among the economists, and I don't really want to offend anyone. But at the same time, sometimes it's more economy, politics less. Something, that kind of dimension that comes into play. It, goes down to work with numbers, statistical models, everything. I know that those are very sexy things to sort of look into, and you can sort of, get a sense of what is happening. But what is missing when we try to sort of focus on that is the real story. As a social science researcher, this is our job to sort of talk about the story, what it really means, why it is happening. So it's not just simply looking into the numbers. It's also about explaining, the things that are happening, the theories, the concepts, the ideas. I think, and from that perspective, I'm very happy that all of those papers, all of the 4 papers that we have, it have actually tried to sort of blend different concepts, with all of the numbers and the other matrices and other econometric analysis. So, and I think I want to focus on two issues. First of all of the papers, I will try to sort of go a little bit one by one, but all of them have big implications for the political science literature, for politics literature, a why question, and at the same time, there's a so what question. So, for instance, if you look into the first paper, where we talk about 3 things. So there is the issue of corruption, there's the issue of economic growth, and what we have tried to understand here, if I'm not mistaken, that when we are dealing with political competition, how competition mediates this relationship between corruption and economic growth. I mean, the understanding that corruption can have 2 effects. It can either increase what we are talking about, greasing the wheel, and there is the other sanding the wheel effects that have been explained in the paper in detail. But when you bring about the competition, the political competition within this scenario, it is quite clear from the study that competition has an important mediating role here. So what it does, the competition essentially reduces the level of corruption, and that has a clear. But again, the question is what? Why does competition, political competition do that? There's a significant reason here. So if you look into the level of competition, if we just think from a continuum perspective, that at one end there's low competition, on the other hand there's high competition. So when there's a low competition, there is a possibility of having a dominant party state. So the way that dominant party state works, if you look into political science literature, there is the possibility of developing a winning coalition. If you go back to Demasquita and others, that how they try to sort of distribute resources, there will be growth, but that growth has a reason. That reason is performance legitimacy. The regime wants to legitimize its performance, and to sort of legitimize that performance, it has to produce growth. But at the same time, the problem is when there's low competition, so the distribution has to be sort of distributed among the members of the winning coalition. So there will be growth, but there will be inequality, because there will not necessarily be equal access to everyone. When you increase competition, what happens is, and as you have identified in your recommendations, we are talking about bureaucratic efficiency. How can we ensure bureaucratic efficiency? Competition, when you have a wider political competition, you have talked about accountability. So these are kind of the political questions, the political building institutions questions. It's not just when you have political competition, it is the responsibility of those institutions to ensure what actually institution does. Institutions provide a certain set of certainty. Without institutions, there is uncertainty. And even in case of growth enhancing corruption, what happens is, as the institutions are not performing, the elites, they come up with an informal solution which is somewhat stable. So they understand how things are moving on. But in terms of when the competition goes low and that informal rules don't work, the growth enhancing competition does not ensure distribution equally. When you have competition, what happens at the same time, those institutions to some extent start working in a predictable manner. That's what Kant's political settlement was talking about, the distribution of power and how the distribution of power actually sort of ensure some sort of predictability. Within that predictability, the elites can work, the elites understand how the rules of the game, the institution is being played out. So that is very, very significant. So that is the why question. So why competition is important? That's one thing I think that should be a focus. And then the so what question. The so what question is basically, this is where the impact of competition and how it can create influence, not growth. And how by reducing growth, you can have some sort of equitable economic growth. That kind of issue becomes important. I think this is where if I try to sort of add the papers with each other, Monell's paper has become important here. Because what he says, when we talk about polarization, think about it. Even in a fairly competitive political system, political competition, there can be polarization. Look in the US. So it has a political competition. I think we will all agree there's high level of political competition. But if you look into the polarization, the level of polarization is increasing. So what is the impact of that polarization? Look into the US. So what happens back in the 60s or 70s? There were differences between the Republicans and the Democrats about abortion rights, about the role of the state, about whether they should have welfare programs or not. But at the same time, they were able to compromise. Reagan managed to pass a budget. Clinton had a temporary assistance for needy family tenant in the mid-90s. There was a compromise, even though these two parties had two different ideological spectrums. When polarization increases, the possibility of this compromise actually, sort of decreases. Decreases. And now, right now, if you look into that, Biden can pass anything. Trump couldn't have his way. And as a result of that, polarization, even when there is competition, it has a negative impact on the economy. Because right now, when Biden is trying to sort of have a student education bill, it's getting nowhere. The border bill, which is kind of what Republicans want, they're not willing to sort of bring it at the floor. So that polarization is significant. Having said that, I just have one request for you. I mean, I see in your paper that you have used Vidam's data to sort of look into polarizations, fragmentation, and others. But you have made a very important point here. When we are talking about polarization, it's much more nuanced. How we are defining polarization in USA is not necessarily the same type or same level of polarization in the case of Bangladesh and others. In one cases, there are ideological polarization based on economic logic, whether we are not classical liberal, whether you want to be a welfare liberal, whether you want to be a libertarian or others. And in other cases, there are cultural, ideological preferences, that kind of thing. So I just want you to think about that, when we're talking about polarizations, how can we capture this nuance? Because not all polarization are essentially will same level, same type. And as a result of, they do not necessarily have the same level of impact. Just think about Bangladesh. Yes, we have the differences between national identities of what you have mentioned. But look, in case of social safety net, social protection, both the political parties agree that we need a social protection. There is no difference between that. If you look into the economic liberalizations, there is broader agreement between those two parties that we need. There is not necessarily any differences between, this two parties. So how can we capture that, and how can we sort of, bring about in our discussion? I mean, as I say that, I'm talking as a student of politics, and I'm trying to sort of understand those particular nuances. This is where, I think important. And again, from this particular perspective, that, competition, then comes, your point. Even within competition, there's polarization, which will have an, economic consequences. And then from the very end of your discussion, you have brought about the discussion about institutions. Again, look into I want to go back to the USA and to some extent India. Why did a dominant, a personality cult like Trump or a dominant party in India couldn't get away with that? Because when we set up an institution, what we often forget, institution has its own, kind of life strategy. Institutions evolve. Institutions have residual power. Institutions build at their strength, and institutions try to fight back. This is where Trump, with his majority, could not overturn Obamacare. This is why John McCain, a Republican, stood against Trump and voted. And this is how the congressional system works. That you need 51 votes to do that, and there is not necessarily you can cross floor anytime you want. So those institutional stability has become important, and this is where the issue of institutional quality becomes important. And that brings me to the third paper, the institutional quality. I was just thinking again. I understand the necessity of using the good governance indicator to sort of measure institutional quality. I have tried to work on that. The problem is, if you look into literature, so measuring institutional quality has always remained a very difficult issue. So I'm not necessarily sure that we can just look into good governance indicators. Just to give an example, I mean, we have talked about Douglas North a lot. So when North talks about institutions, he clearly defines institutions as a humanly devised constraint that will influence human behavior. That's the rules of the game, which will be both formal and informal. When Ostrom talks about institutions, she actually brings about the arenas of action. So those kind of things, but So there's an interesting article in Journal of Institutional Economics which talked about that when we talk about institutions, we can sort of discuss it from three different perspectives. There is the subject category institutions, that means legal institutions, political institutions, and that kind of thing. There is the degree of formality. If you go back to Douglas North, formal and informal institutions, and there is the other other point which was put forward by Williamson, that there is the issue of degree of embeddedness. Now, the degree of embeddedness is how the institutions is actually within the political system and can create an impact on both political and economic outcomes. Now, within the degree of embeddedness, Williamson pointed out there are 4 different levels. First one is actually the lower level, where we have the norms, traditions, and everything, which is very difficult to alter. At the second level, we have the institutional environment, which is property rights, common law system or other system. At the third level, we have the good governance indicators, that is the performance. And at the fourth level, there are the rules that work to sort of define employment and others. The reason I'm talking about that if we only focus on good governance, the problem is we are just scratching on the one tier of institutional quality. We are actually leaving the other tiers. So those are very, very important. So I will just request that when we try to sort of measure the institutional quality, the nuance of the institutional quality, I think that should something that we need to take care. I left Dr. I think I still have some time.
Yes, just for a few comments on Dr. Issa.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I leave it for the last because this is the one I really, really loved. And I don't know whether Dr. Issa is still here. I would have loved to have your whole paper. Unfortunately, what I get from Sanem is the PowerPoint presentation. I would have loved it because one of the reasons is I'm a big fan of historical institutionalism approach. So, the way sort of, you talked about, the time period and, you talked about 1990, sorry, Let me just quickly check. The 2001 and 2009, then 2009 and 2014, and this on, but those 3 time period. That was important. And I think that from an analytical framework, Mushtaq Khan's political settlement, and this is why this is something I also talked to Monem, Mr. Monem. You can also think about when you're talking about the political polarization. You can also think about how you can incorporate this political settlement. But it's about distribution of power and institutional arrangement. How we can bring that within that argument and see how it works. I think that would be an interesting way of looking at the thing. In the shadow of violence, Douglas North's this is interesting, Dr. Shah. I find it really interesting because in that particular book, Douglas North's book, In the Shadow of Violence, Professor Mushtaq has a chapter where he tried to sort of work on, Douglas North's framework, limited access order, basic access order, open access order, and then he moved to political settlement framework later. And the way the political settlement framework has been utilized here, I think it was good. But what I was missing here, and I'm sure that this is basically due to time constraint, because when we are talking about these different time frames, I was looking for kind of explanation that how the power structure was shifting within different time frames, how different type of elites were becoming powerful or powerless, how the institutional arrangement was kind of creating an impact. You are promising to sort of provide a 3-level analysis. The institutional arrangement in terms of financial administration, aid and their role. Unfortunately, you didn't get the time. I'm sure that you can talk a little bit about that in your discussion session. And I think that will give us that the historical institutional perspective, that how the power changes has happened, how that has affected the tables that you show, the changes that has occurred. And probably we can also sort of identify the critical junctures, the critical point in that from 2001 to 9 or 2009 to 14, where things have started to shape up or reshaped up, and that's particularly I'm looking for from the discussion. I think that's all from now. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Khan, for very elaborated comments on the papers presented by our esteemed authors. So now it is over to the audience. Please feel free to ask any kind of question. And there is no bar on language. There is no bar on framing the question. Just feel free to ask any kind of questions to the authors. Please. Yes.
Hello, good afternoon.
Yeah.
I am Sanjay Das. I am from Department of Economics. My question is to Monem Bhai. You told us regarding the state policymakers can take to combat political polarization. But what can we do as individuals, or what grassroots initiatives can be taken to fight this political polarization? Given that our population is with diverse background, how can we keep it united? Thank you.
All right. I would request our authors to take notes of the question, and you will be given a chance to respond. All right. Thank you, Sanjay. Yes. Yes, please. Faria, go ahead. Questions, and just a second. I mean, normative comments are not encouraged. So please be limited within the paper's scope.
Okay, sir. So my name is Faria. I have recently graduated from Development Studies, University of Dhaka. So my question is to Ms. Shubhatra. Your findings show a very interesting association. I'm curious to know if there is a variation between different states in the outcome variable, and if that led you to find any interesting background cases or variables that denotes why the positive association can be seen.
All right. Thank you. Faria, yes.
Good afternoon. I am Salim Rahman. Currently, I am pursuing my master's degree in Development Studies, University of Dhaka. My question is, Ms. Sushri Subhadra. As you say, higher corruption leads the higher HDI and economic growth. My question is, how can we define corruptions? As there is a micro level corruptions and macro level corruptions. First of all, if in your quantitative data model, as we know, there are independent variable must be uncorrelated with error time. If so, then we have to use that IV or indigeneity bias problem. So in this particular case, is there's any problem or that. And number three, I hope maybe in your presentation that was the as we can find the very interesting results that higher economic that is not unusual, right? So my transfer knowledge is how can we explain this nature? How can we explain that exactly the higher corruption leads to that higher human development goal economic? What's the behind? And my second question is Ms. Samia Islam, as you use the cross-sectional data in your paper, my question is if the 6 Asian emerging country 2002 to 2020, then why we can't use the panel data analysis in this particular sections, as you can regulatory framework, they are very much time variant and it's a time changeable. So why we don't use that panel analysis? Thank you.
Thank you. I guess we have first round of questions already for all of the presenters. So let me, well, Munem, you can take the first chance to respond. Then we'll come to Subhadra and then Samia. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to respond to Sir's question first. Thing you told about, sir, the definition of polarization. Basically, sir, the way Wheaton defines polarization is the ideological difference.
But there also to political segregation and the other things, right?
I mean, the paper is only political polarization, sir. So Wheaton actually defines political polarization as the ideological differences between the major parties. So then, Sanjoy, thank you for your question. As you asked, the grassroots initiatives to fight political polarization, as I might have added to my presentation, that we have to be, we can't be ignorant. So that's the first line of defense against political polarization. We have many sources to information. We have YouTube, we have newspapers, online newspapers, offline newspapers, channels, and besides, you might say that some might be biased. However, when you follow several sources, I think the percentage of bias comes down.
Thank you, Munem. Thank you so much. I guess I think we get the point.
So we get the point.
Right. So it's now Subhadra.
Thank you for your question. Here, I don't do any state-specific analysis. It's overall panel data study for 16 major Indian states during 1993 to 2020. Choosing the time frame is for data availability constraint, and also when you ask me the micro and macro level of corruption, my another work in progress paper in micro level of corruption. That is, that paper we also get the same result that in India, especially, the bureaucratic efficiency and speed depend upon corruption. Like paying a bribe is normal in India. For doing a small thing, we have to pay a bribe. And in my analysis, I only focus on the bureaucratic corruption registered by Vigilance Department under Section Vigilance Act. And thank you for the endogenic problem. I also know that there is endogenic problem, but I did not able to find any particular IV till now. I am looking for that.
Great, Subhadra. Yes, Samia, please.
First, to answer your question, actually, I guess I failed to clarify, but the data that we used was panel data. We took the time frame was from 2002 to 2016, and we had 6 cross-sectional units. So in total, they made strongly balanced panel data, and like we performed our analysis on that. And since I am in the possession of the mic, so I would like to thank Shan sir for his insights. And I'd just like to let you know, yes, sir, we are considering the use of further, like different indicators and indexes to measure institutional quality, since six governance dimensions, they have like their own questions as well. Thank you, sir.
Great. So, Dr. Istar, if you were around, would you like to respond to the comments made by our discussion?
Yeah, sure.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, but I can't, I'm unable to start my video, but maybe I was restricted. So, but you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Shahan Saab.
Units and limited to 6 countries. We aim to conduct further research upon examining the constitutional unit list. And I hope the findings that we get then will be more rigorous and more reliable. And regarding the heteroscedasticity problem or correlation problem, since we have used the visible generalized squares method, this is an extension of generalized squares which actually allows for the covariance matrix of error terms. That is, if there are any correlation within error, it actually calculates that, and through iteration process, this actually allows for the heteroscedasticity and correlation impact to be minimized. So because that model, the FGLS that we have used to remedy the cross-sectional dependence, the heteroscedasticity and correlation were automatically so that's how we count. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Good answer to this methodological issue. All right. So with that, I guess we are at the very end of our session. As you see, there are 4 very interesting papers which focused on different aspects associated with challenges and opportunities that define the landscape of political economy analysis in the global southern context. And with this very compelling insights and supported by empirical analysis, we have great ideas about the issues they presented here. But at the same time, we also acknowledge the fact that there are appetite for more nuanced analysis and elaborated discussion, and as the way Dr. Shahan said, then so what question? So we also need to answer that question as well. However, I again congratulate all the paper presenters for their hard work, for their brilliant makeup of the arguments. And with that, I hope that this engagement and deliberation, what you have done in the question answer session and also in the overall deliberation session, will help us to foster a greater understanding of the issue, and will lead us to take our scientific journey to the next level for establishing a better understanding of our society around. So let's hope for the better understanding, and also let's hope for better activism for taking this understanding into action to make our society better and just. Thank you. With that note, I again thank you very much for your patience and participation. And again, my esteemed colleague and discussion, and also the colleagues who have joined online from outside Bangladesh, we congratulate all of you, and we wish and thanks, Sanim, for having me here this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for this insight in discussion, and thank you everyone for providing the document. And now I will need to hand over the certificate of the.
Okay, so there is another part, please. Shubhadra.
So you can run it.
Please. Okay. Thank you.
No.
Thank you.
Now is Samia Islam. Thank you, sir.
Wish you all the best with your physics. Thank you.
Now Mr. Ahmad Azhar. Yaman.
Fine.
And I also like to convey a message to Sarajuddin idea that your certificate is provided in online. I hope you can hear me.
Thank you. Dr. Ishtar, there is a certificate for you which will be provided online. Is that fine with you?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. We appreciate your participation.
So we can take a group picture.
Okay.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Yeah.